go. So yes, hi everyone. I'm super excited to be doing this workshop, and thank you so much for being here as well. This is a really nice opportunity to, get to know you, hopefully at the end, and have maybe a safe space so we can share knowledge, experiences, and ask any questions for small or big that they are. I think it's important to have these spaces. So please take it as that, just a space to share knowledge and ask questions. So yeah, let's get to it. A few things. So this, as you can see here in this first slide, the aim of this workshop is obviously try to empower and share the knowledge that I have. But also is to raise money for the Royal Free charity. So with this charity, I run the London Marathon. I can see my medal. I'm really excited about that. This was in October, so I still have the fundraiser going until the end of this month. So if you want and can donate on the link here below, I'll be sending this later on, so you can also do it. I'll put it in the chat as well. So any help is welcome. This charity supports the NHS, workers, they support research, and also they support hospitals, among other initiatives. It's a really nice charity, so please check it out as well. Yes, so a little bit about me. So I'm originally from Colombia and Chile. I'm based in London. I've lived here for about 7 years. Before that, I was in Amsterdam. So it's been almost 10 years since I've been working in fashion, most of it in luxury brands. And 3 years ago, I started my own label, Anciela. And yeah, after many considerations on why or not do it, I basically decided to how I can apply the knowledge that I had from working in fashion into doing something a bit more conscious, sustainable, that was important to my heart and maybe to a community that needed definitely more visibility in fashion, which is the Latin community, and try to celebrate my own culture. So this is what I've been doing for the last 3 years. That's a little bit about me. So on this workshop, as you might have read already, we're going to go through these points that are very important. We're going to talk a little bit about the current issues. Then we'll go to a little bit information on how garments are made. Then about materials. Then about garment care, longevity. Then we will talk about recycling, upcycling, donating, greenwashing, and last but not least, the power of the consumer. And then we'll go to Q&As. As I said before, if you have any questions that pop in through the slides or whatever you're thinking, just put it in the chat and then we'll address it towards the end of the talk. So yeah, feel free. Again, there's no small, big question. Just please ask whatever you want. I'm here to share my knowledge, to hopefully, give you what I know and you can apply it in your daily life or working life. Also, if you already work in the fashion industry, then you can ask more technical questions. If you're just interested, curious, also ask any questions you want. So welcome. Okay. Current issues. I mean, as we all know, COP27 just happened, and the issues are many. As you will understand, as we are talking about supply chains and the fashion industry itself, every step of how a garment is made has many issues. And all of that, it's affecting communities, the climate, everything over time as well. But in this particular workshop, I just want to focus on this particular problem that happens with fashion, which is the overproduction, overconsumption, and waste. So as you can read there, this is something that we can't avoid anymore. And I think it's the issue that as consumers, we can better address. It's like within our powers to understand that we do have influence from this perspective. So if we try to tackle maybe one issue amongst all of the issues, we can make things change quickly as well and become more aware. So that's why I'm going to tackle in this workshop this specific problem. Okay, so on this point, I think a lot of the issues maybe with the sort of gray areas of fashion, and a lot of what we don't know is that we don't really know how our garments are made. Who can tell me today that they know exactly the garment they're wearing, they know exactly where it came from? Can we say that? If anyone has a story or wants to tell it, please also share it in the chat and also at the end, because that is the main challenge. Like, apart from a care label, we don't necessarily have all the information on how garments are made. Where is our clothing coming from? We don't really know that, do we? So this is a little bit what we're going to talk about in this section, is the cycle of a garment. So what do we know? I mean, our care labels mainly just show the material in our garment. They also show perhaps where it's made. So that means where it was assembled. And that's pretty much what we have. Then we have a little bit about the care, the washing. Then we know, okay, what to do with it, how to wash it, whether it's dry cleaning, washing machine, hand wash, all of that. But beyond that, it doesn't tell us much of that. So the idea of this is taken from Fashion Revolution, great initiative, which at the end there's all the resources where you can get more information if you want. But this is a really basic supply chain, just for you to understand where we start. So basically, as anything that grows from the ground, it needs like the soil, it needs the land, the farming. So that's where we start with the production of raw materials. Then, as you can see in between, sorry about that, I can see in between the little trucks and the shipping containers, all of that represents the transport. So it means that the raw materials have to be transported into another place, which can be the same country or different country. Normally it's a different country, that's how it works now. And then it needs to be processed. So ginning is just like the separation of the raw material into the staples that can be then going into the spinning process and then become yarns. Then they can be woven in a mill into a fabric, or they can be knitted into something else. Then after that, they need to be processed, or they need to be dyed into a color. Obviously, when you buy a garment, it's available in many colors. Then after that, it's transported again to be cut and trimmed and made into a garment. So all the pieces are then assembled together by factories and then made into products that are then shipped again into warehouses, and then finally make it into the shops, or maybe if it's an e-com website, it's just in another warehouse where they can then ship it to the, let's say, the consumer. And something very important, and I think what we're going to focus on today, is the transport in every single stage, but also what happens at the end of the life of a garment. So after it goes to the shop, someone maybe buys it or not, then what happens after? Most of the garments are just disposed and they will end up in landfills. Maybe sometimes you can extend the life of that garment, but most of the times it just ends up in landfills. And most of the times, which is also a problem of globalization, all these wasted garments, secondhand garments that they're not in our economy anymore, they end up in a country like Chile, for example. So I'm also half Chilean. They end up in landfills there, or in Africa. But then what's happening now is like countries they don't want the waste anymore. So then now we have to deal with waste. So it's becoming a waste issue for countries that are overproducing, over-consuming, and we don't know what to do with the waste. So this is where the tricky bit ends. And as you can see, this is a simple supply chain, but you can see how it's so many stages that can get very confusing. And the more confusing it gets, the more problems arise. So this is where we need to pay attention to. So here, just please have a look at the transport and also the end of life. That's where we can analyze it easier. So this is, again, a very simplified part of the supply chain. In this case, I chose this graph about cotton and, let's say, an Asian sort of supply chain about cotton. So as you can see here, these steps is reflecting on where the raw material, in this case, the cotton, was produced, which is in China, as you can see here. Then where this is sent in step 2 to India, to be processed there and then made into a yarn. And you see all of these processes: wash, heat treated, bleach, and dyed. So it means like that's also a process that takes place in another country, which means the waste that stage implies has to be dealt in that country. So keep that in mind too. Then after that, it goes to another country yet again, to be made into a t-shirt. And then that is sent for other different processes. That can be a label, that can be washing, that can be a finishing. And then finally, and as you can see here, that's where the biggest trip happens, especially when the production is overseas and sold on the other side of the world. That's then shipped to the UK to be sold, put an embroidery on or whatever it is, a print, and then companies can resell it. So as you can see here, there's a lot of miles, a lot of transport. And the issue where it starts getting a little bit confusing, it can happen. I mean, it can be that could be organic cotton from China or from India, from wherever it's coming from. But then it has to travel so far for every single step. And then that traveling obviously occurs not in a sustainable way. So it's still very much oil intensive as it's shipped. So that is where we start to thinking, okay, this is a global issue. So as long as we cannot ensure that the transport of these goods from one country to another are made in a sustainable way, we can ensure, that a product can be fully sustainable. So that's what we need to keep in mind, that in a way it's still like approach as single processes within our supply chain. So it could be that the beginning here, is organic, but then the transport is not. Then because it's a different countries that this occurs, then countries have different rules as well. Sorry about that. Let's that person in. So that is basically the problem, because we cannot guarantee that each step of that supply chain can, be fully sustainable. So again, people usually say, but what is sustainability then? And that is the big question. What is sustainability? Because in the end, there's not one answer. It can be different for every country, every person, because how sustainable you are really depends on the environment and the country you live in. So if you can guarantee the supply chain, if a company can explain you every single step in their own supply chain, and then transparently explain where it was made, how it was delivered and shipped, then they can say they are fully sustainable. But obviously, because the supply chains become really confusing and very step heavy, and we cannot really govern every single country, every single factory where things happen, then we cannot assure to the consumer this is fully sustainable. There's always going to be something that won't be fully sustainable. So that's what we need to keep an eye open for. And obviously, knowing this is key, because then whenever you're buying something, you then have that knowledge of like, oh, wow, this is made in, 10, 12, 15 steps. So then you can ask maybe about a single step that you're interested in. So this is basically what you need to keep your eyes open for. Again, this is a very simplified supply chain that is mainly based in Asia, this one, and then shipped to UK. But like this, it gets very confusing because, for instance, the US grows a lot of cotton as well. And sometimes that cotton is shipped then to Asia for manufacturing and then shipped back again to the US to be sold. So this is a very simple one, but it can be much more confusing. And then again, you keep adding miles and miles. So that's what you need to keep in mind. If you're really interested into this, especially about the t-shirt industry and the cotton history, this is an amazing book that I discovered when I was a student, and talks about the history of cotton, since Industrial Revolution goes through slavery and what happened then with the production, and explains as well the issues that we're dealing with now. So if you're really interested in that, I recommend this book 100%. The link is also there, so you can see it later too. And yes, the first thing, and as I told you before, what we see on our washing label in our garments, it's the materials. So I guess that's the first bit of information that we are provided with, what supposedly is in our garments. So material. So we'll go through these. They're not in a particular order of relevance, but I think these are the fibers I think that are most common and that are becoming more popular. And I think we all wonder a little bit like, what's about with cotton, what's happening with this. So this is just a selection of new developments, but also, what to watch out for and what certifications include as well, like, what you can keep an eye on, basically. Yeah. So if there's any more questions maybe about other materials that are not here, feel free to just add them in the chat as well. There we go. So quickly about cotton. So as I told you, cotton is it's a very ancient fiber as well. I mean, it's one of the first fibers that we started to farm and weave and make into products since Egyptian times. So it is a very durable material, and it can be very sustainable as well. The problem with cotton and what happened in recent years, it was the fact that it wasn't being grown sustainably anymore. And this is because of overproduction, and, a lot of the pressure was falling onto farmers that then were forced to use more pesticides, use more GMO seeds, So this is where the whole problem started with cotton, that the farming became not sustainable, and then farmers needed to adapt and deal with the consequences of that. And this is where, it all started to go wrong, and then we couldn't sort of trace it anymore. So this is the first point, traceability and origin. So the first thing you need to ask yourselves, and I know your t-shirt and your garment probably won't say where the cotton is coming from, but you can ask these questions to your to the shop you're buying. Where do you source your cotton? They should be able to let you know where the cotton came from, whether it came from Africa, US, China, South America. So they should tell you this. So you can ask this, because even if they might not have the organic stamps and all of that, it gives you a bit of a sense of where the cotton was coming from. So if you're buying it from the UK and the cotton is from China, but then you see that in your label it says it's made in South America, then you can understand, again, going back to the map of your supply chain, that this specific product needed to travel from one side of the world to the other side of the world, then to be sold to you. So that's a little bit how I want you to sort of start thinking about your clothing and what the information is telling us, basically. So start with material always. So traceability and origin, always something very important to understand. With cotton especially, as I was talking before about farming, water and chemicals is something very important to look out for too, as growing cotton it's a really thirsty crop. So it does require a lot of water to function, especially with GMO seeds. So when it's not organic, then it needs even more water. So for instance, if you are buying something that is made with organic cotton, at least you can understand that this was grown in a more sustainable way and was fed with mostly rainwater. So that is something to keep in mind. Cotton usually grows as well in places that are very dry. So that's why it's also to keep in mind about that specific environment where the cotton was grown. And then we go into farming. But again, it's about thinking about the water consumption of a crop specifically. Of course, there's new ways. We're talking about, you can see the last regenerative organic certified. So that's again all about regenerative agriculture. So it is happening, especially in India. Like there are ways that the farming is changing, evolving into trying to grow the crop in a slower way and a better way, where the soil doesn't get depleted too much, So that's some of the, initiatives. So sometimes your label might have these symbols. I thought it was, nice to put them here. So whenever you see them on a website or on your label, you know that what it's a little bit about, Again, another point about cotton specifically is about the fiber blending. So most of the times when cotton is blended with something else, it makes it very difficult to be biodegradable. One of the good things about cotton is like being a natural fiber, from plants, that you could quickly, put it in a compost, or it could be biodegraded easily. But once it's blended, it makes the process like really long, and it's very difficult to then recycle again. So keep that in mind as well. Also about the longevity, it wouldn't last that long when something is 100% cotton, and the quality of the cotton is about the weight of it as well. then it would last longer. So that's something that you need to start thinking about as well. If it's very thin, if it's blended with some lycra, with some polyester, like immediately the quality lowers, but also the viability of it to be recycled in the future too. So that's what you need to keep in mind. Again, you will get this information via email, so you can, have a look, maybe research into specific initiatives and logos, if you have any other questions, of course. Then this is again about still plant-based. So this is man-made cellulosic fibers, which are made mainly from wood pulp, so like from trees or eucalyptus, like different sort of branches. Bamboo falls into this category as well. So in this case, I've just selected two of the fibers that are sustainable because they have a closed loop and they have made sure to govern their own supply chain, so they can demonstrate that every stage of how they process their fabrics is sustainable and it's coming from good sources. So that's why I selected Lenzing Fibers, and that includes Tencel Lux, which is a trademark. And when you see this on your label, then watch out for the trademark, then it's from Lenzing itself. The problem a lot of the times with the man-made cellulosic fibers, and it's about their supply chain. They just cannot assure, or they cannot be transparent enough about assuring that every step of that supply chain is sustainable. So you end up with many companies having their own type of tencel or bamboo, but they just can't really assure how it's made, and that's where it gets tricky. Whereas these two companies can then demonstrate that they have a clean supply chain and is sustainable. So that is mainly the difference, but it's basically, a base of rayon, viscose, Viscose and rayon are the previous sort of fibers, that the first ones that started from the 60s to become as an alternative and cheaper sort of material than silk, but it's the same sort of feel and look, but it's coming from wood, so forest. So then the question is, how are these forests being processed? And that brings a whole other questions. Whereas most of tencel these days, it's coming from sustainable bush sources, so mainly eucalyptus as well. So, they can demonstrate that. So that is basically the difference. But many companies are doing similar fibers. But again, when they're too new, they can assure like a clean supply chain. So that is basically the problem. Again, you can read more of that on the links here. There's an orange fiber, which is very exciting. I haven't used this one myself, so I'm looking forward to trying it at some point. But it's the same story, from citrus fruits. It's very exciting. Apparently it feels like silk, so this will be really nice to try. On the sort of downside of these fibers, even though they are working really hard on making it very lush, very beautiful, just like silk, there is a longevity issue sometimes. So for me personally, I've worked with these fabrics, and sometimes they might not be as strong or durable as silk, especially on the jersey side. So there's still a lot more work to be done on these specific fibers, and it's something also to look out for. Obviously it's a process, like they're working really hard on it, but it is a question of like whether you use this material or that, or you buy this t-shirt or that t-shirt, but you're also thinking about longevity. So in this particular context, these fibers are still working on it. That's what I can say about that. Again, they're progressing really fast, so it's something that is improving every year. So that's very exciting as well, as a designer and as a consumer, to have maybe something, instead of silk. One of my favorites as well, hemp and linen. These are also cotton ancient fibers, and they're very strong. They used to make ropes for like these, sailing ships. I mean, it's a very strong material, very durable, has great properties, can be washed, is completely also biodegradable. I mean, it's great material. But again, it's because it has a certain look, and it has looked like that for a long time, so somehow it goes in and out of fashion. But at the moment, there's also really good mills with this tradition that are trying to make it more exciting. A lot of good, exciting textiles coming from Ireland. And again, trying to make it a bit more exciting, because these are great materials. I've worked with them a lot. And again, for this one, especially if you're based in Europe, a lot of the hemp and linen grows in Europe and is processed in Europe and woven in Europe. So then in that sense, if you are, in this sort of area, it's very good to have in your supply chain. Like, it means, the fibers don't have to travel as long. So going back to the supply chain and transport. So this is a great material. Again, some of the standards that you can have can be organic, can be, Masters of Linen, which is the European one. So it shows you where it's grown, but mainly they grow in France, in Holland, a little bit here in the UK as well. So this is exciting. Again, the same principles as for every of the fibers, traceability and origin. So make sure you can ask these questions when you're buying something. Where is your hemp from? Where is the linen from? And they should be able to tell you an origin, the country of origin of this material. Water and chemicals, the same, because you can have a beautiful material, but then if it's dyed in a non-sustainable way with hazardous chemicals, then again, it's not a clean product anymore. So every step counts. Fiber blending, same story. It depends what it is. Hemp and linen blended, because they're still from the same family, they can biodegrade very easily. I've tried this myself. It goes in a compost bin and it can be processed within 14 days. It's quite incredible. But if it's then again blended with the synthetic material, we're then polluting the product again. It cannot be processed, cannot be recycled. So this is a whole way of thinking that is every step counts, basically. Again, one that is still one of the favorites, silk. Same thing. There is not that many standards and certifications for silk, unfortunately. You can have organic silk or piece silk, which, is more animal friendly for the moths, as you can see there. But again, the advantages of silk is still a very much natural material, and if it's not blended, can be also biodegradable and is extremely durable too. So that is the thing about silk. I mean, even though other cellulosic fabrics try to be silk, like, they're still not the same. So even though silk is very labor intensive, but if it can be sourced, in an organic way that you can sort of prove where it comes from, and that the farmers are, paid fairly for the price of either the cocoons or the fabric, the fibers, then it's a great material as well. Again, water and chemicals. So that's about silk. So yes, unfortunately on this one, there's not so many certifications, I'm afraid, at the moment. With this one, it's tricky. I mean, it's still very popular for digital printing. I mean, a silk scarf, that is still an item that is very popular. So again, it's more about how it's processed. So chemicals in the dyeing process. That's what you need to watch out for if you're buying something that is printed and the base is silk. Make sure that the prints are ASO free, all of these things. This is not even allowed anymore in Europe, but it's something that maybe on the label it should say that it's ASO free. Things like that to watch out for silk. Quickly with wool. Wool again, these are a silk. So they are natural materials, but they're animal materials. So it's something to, they're not vegan, basically. But wool, again, is a very sustainable material in the sense of that is biodegradable, is still natural, if not blended. And it's very, throughout history, it's very durable. It's warm, especially in cold countries. You can sort of beat what wool does in comparison to synthetics. Obviously, it depends where it's coming from. Whether you can trace at the origin is something, again, that you can ask. And for wool, there is more certification, so that's really good as well. You can see them there. So on your label, it could say this, or on the website where you bought it from. And something on the ethical level to watch out for wool is that is coming from non-mulesed sheep. So that means about animal cruelty, that the sheep are treated properly, they're not mutilated and cut just, to avoid infections and all kind of things. So that is something to look out for. Like if you can't find that anywhere, or they cannot answer that question coming, from where the wool came from, that is probably questionable. Again, the same water and chemicals. For wool, same story, can be dyed. So depending how that's handled, is something to look out for as well. Again, this is quickly. I know I've only go about natural materials. However, there are some interesting developments. Obviously, in the past 10 years, especially, there have been a lot of developments about recycled, materials. And most of it is synthetic. And the reason to be is just because, obviously, everything that's synthetic cannot be biodegradable naturally. So unfortunately, and we all know this is a plastic, we're drowning in plastic, but it needs to be recycled manually. So that is the problem with plastic. I mean, even though at the very beginning, when we were talking about sustainability, these recycled synthetics were very exciting, EcoNeil and New Life being two most prominent. Again, now that we know more about microplastics and what that implies, and the whole problem about these invisible plastic particles, surrounding us, then there's the question: do we need to use this? But how do we deal with the waste? So again, just mentioning here is something maybe to talk about. Of course, some synthetic materials are still really good depending on the application. All sportswear or waterproof, and depending on how you use it, it can be more useful to use this instead of another material that is natural but not waterproof, for instance. Again, you can read more about these specific materials there. I mean, a lot of them, they do deal with some kind of the waste, so from either is recycle plastic bottles or from fishing nets, which is great. But again, then there's a question about microplastics. So maybe put it in the comments there how do you feel about it, or whether you knew about it. But these are the developments. So these are very much two companies that are, very popular. Again, this is another section as well about garment care and longevity. Just before we continue, is there any questions? Okay, there's many questions here. Maybe we'll go quickly about the ones that are about materials. So I live in Brazil, and here hemp is prohibited, not only because it is the same plant as marijuana, but because of the conflict of interest between cotton growers. What do I know is that this plant has no longer fibers and uses less water in its production. Could you talk about it in the rest of the world? How do people see it in other countries? That is a very good question, Gabriela, because one of the reasons why hemp lost its popularity was, since the 60s, 70s, when the whole weed, became so popular, then it got a bad reputation. But actually, even though it's the same sort of family and the plants, it's not even the same type of plant, So they're within the same family, but they're grown differently. So that's a little bit the issue with hemp, that it gets this bad reputation. At least in Europe, it's changing. I mean, myself and my brand, I try to use hemp, but when people see it, it just doesn't look like anything. It looks like a beautiful piece of clothing. So it also comes from us makers, and to promote more of hemp. I can share like a really beautiful video about the history of hemp and how they explain how it lost its reputation and what we can do. Again, a lot of it is true. Like if it's dealing against other farmers, there's conflicts as well. So I would say if you want to do something with hemp and you're in Brazil, you'll have to, I guess, import it. But again, if it's not available to you and your surroundings, hopefully you can also maybe do an initiative, write maybe it's your representative, see if something can be done about this. Again, just share all information about hemp and see how we can promote it more. I feel like, at least in Europe, because we're all trying to see what's available to us again, a lot of the farmers thought, okay, there is something to this, so let's try to grow more hemp. But again, it depends as well with policy. So in a way, the farmers need to be on board with this, because if no one's growing it and no one, the offer is not there, no one's going to buy it. So that's a little bit it's a little bit annoying, and the problem of things that you need all of the pieces to move in order to change someone's mindset and also change a system. But it's tricky. I mean, feel free to, I'll share the link about the video about the hemp history, which is really beautiful, but it is a tricky one. Definitely agree with you. Like it lost its reputation, so it's something we're reviving now. Again, if you have any specific questions, you can also email me directly. Let's see, anything else about materials. Is it true that the fashion industry is indeed the second most pollutant industry following after oil industry? Again, depends on where you're getting your statistics. So if we look at from a water perspective, but polluting only is not the second, it's about the third, as far as I know today. Again, it is polluting in the sense of obviously it uses a lot of oil in transport, as I explained with the supply chain, but depends where you're looking at it. So it is one of the most polluting industries. But if you compare it to obviously coal, just the oil industry, or even like technology, is not, let's say, still not more polluting than those. Again, we're not talking about the most polluting. It's more like ways of how we can, essentially change that. So a lot of the oil polluting part of fashion goes into transport. But if we're talking about water, then we're talking about how it affects the livelihood of the farmers that are growing certain crops in specific, it's usually really poor parts of the world. So, depends how you look at it, but it's so far the third most polluting. Again, depends on what you're looking at specifically. Let's see, does blockchain can allow us 100% sustainable? In theory, yes. I mean, blockchain could be a way that us, as consumers, we could monitor the journey of a garment, but it is a very new technology. So I don't know any company that has a fully functional blockchain in place. And again, it really depends on the access that those people in the supply chain have to internet, to a phone. How can we really check? So I do think at a point, hopefully we'll get there, but it's still a very much experimental technology. I'm really hoping we can get there. So that's why if it's a supply chain that is very complex, then the blockchain will be very complex as well. So we'll see about that. I think in probably the next 3 to 5 years, we'll probably see blockchains being a little bit more advanced into how us consumers can easily monitor it from our phones. So let's see what happens. There's another question here. Yes, digital fashion promotes sustainability as the clothes are not physically made. That's true. Digital fashion is, again, very exciting. And I think especially if you're an influencer or you just borrow clothes to take beautiful pictures and want to talk about them, I think digital fashion is the way to go. Obviously, I mean, for me as a designer, I have a very close relationship to clothing. And it's also next to my skin. So for me, it's not so much about the way it looks, but the way it feels. So that's the only thing about digital fashion that is still very much in a visual way. Maybe in a virtual world as an avatar or something. But I feel like, unfortunately, we still need to wear clothing every day. So clothing is always going to form a part of our lives. So that's my personal opinion about still physical fashion is the main thing, but digital fashion is very exciting. It's improving every year. I mean, if you compare to how you could wear something 5 years ago to today, it's very different. So I'll be looking out for that. Right. So we've gone, supply chain, materials, all of that. The idea is not to bombard you with a lot of information. This is still on the surface, but just things to look out for. So now we're going to talk about more, actively what can we do and what options are there. So most of it is again, garments that we already have, what to do with them, how to look after them better, how do we make them last longer. And in this part, there's one of my favorite authors, which is here, Ursula de Castro. Loved Clothes Last. I mean, it's a beautiful book. I think it's if you are very crafty, you're very hands-on. It's a beautiful book to learn from. And one of my favorite quotes is, "The most sustainable garment is already in your closet." So that's the most sustainable. What you already own, basically. But again, we need to know how to look after these garments in order to make them last longer. So here I've added a few companies. The Clothes Doctor, it's a great service. These two are both UK based. I don't know if someone who's not in the UK, probably they offer other services internationally, but I'm sure you will find equivalents of these companies in your countries too. Because again, it's like a trend that became global about looking after your clothing. So I'm sure you will find equivalents. But basically, it's just very easy, user-friendly services that either provide sustainable products, how you can clean your clothes, or subscription services where they can repair your clothes, for a fair price. You can, for instance, change the lining of a jacket, maybe do the hem of trousers. Back in the day, I mean, maybe it was your grandma or your mom doing this for you. But of course, now we live in a very different world. We don't necessarily have the time to learn a new skill. So these are, two very easy apps and websites where you can get this made. Or like the Seam London is great because they connect you with the local seamstresses. A lot of the services are sometimes not so easy to get to. You don't know if they're good or not, but here you can, read the reviews. So it's sort of aimed for like younger people that may be a little bit lost in how to look after your clothes. And again, this is a very interesting topic as well. This is about recycling, upcycling, and donating. So first of all, we hear these terms a lot, but I think I get this question asked a lot. Most people tell me, but what is recycling? What is upcycling? Like there's this confusion. So the main difference is like the intention is completely different. So upcycling, it just means that you take an existing product and then you're just extending the life of it by renewing it, redesigning. You are somehow changing this product to up the value of this product as well. So that is a difference. You can see where the term came from and then how it comes back into fashion and how we look at it like right now. There is many companies that offer also a service of upcycling or a lot of tutorials. They do workshops where they teach you how you can change up maybe an old t-shirt and then extend the life of it. So then the idea is that we avoid these garments to go to landfill. So we just want to keep it in circulation as long as possible and wear it as long as possible. Whereas recycling is a very technical process. So recycling is basically you take something that exists, you break it down into little pieces, and then you make it into a new fiber. So then you create new yarns that can go back into, another mill to make fabric, to make a new product. So this again is going back to the recycled synthetics, for instance, that come from recycled plastic bottles. So they're all broken into little pieces through a machine, and then made into new fibers, new staple fabrics, and new yarns. Yeah. So then the problem with recycling, and not a problem, but again, it takes up a lot of energy. So that's why we want to keep things in circulation as long as possible, because recycling, it's basically a dream. It's a fantasy still. Like some companies have a closed loop, but again, what can be recycled is not that much. I mean, if you think about how a garment is made, it's not only the fabric, but it's the buttons, the zippers, the yarn that it was made from. So then basically to broken into pieces and you need to remove the zipper, the button, and then what's left of just the fiber, if it's not blended with another fiber, then it can be recycled. So that's why plastic, if it's one type of plastic, can be recycled. But as long as if it's mixed, it makes it very difficult and sometimes it cannot be recycled. So that is a little bit the problem with recycling. And again, it's the question of the factory where it's being recycled is very energy consuming, this process, because of all the shredding and remaking. So how is that factory running? Are they running with renewable energy or is it just normal electricity? So all these questions is that you need to think recycling is not yet that efficient. So when we see something recycled, it doesn't necessarily mean it's more sustainable. Like that is basically the principle. Again, very new, exciting things coming up. There was a new factory in Sweden that is recycling cotton, and they promise that it's closed loop and they can recycle tons and tons of cotton. So that's exciting. I mean, things are happening. We'll see how that pans out. That they just opened it like 2 weeks ago. So that's about the recycling. Again, other initiatives that are very exciting too about keeping garments in circulation for longer. There is Rotaro. So Rotaro is UK based, but you can basically rent clothing. So it could be for brands or it could be for individuals that just want to keep the garments there to be rented. You can go to them and they can, do the whole service, and very easy, very user friendly. So that's one way to give a second life to your garments. Obviously, clothing swap, very popular. On this one, there's so many initiatives. So literally, there's many events. Eventbrite has many of those clothing swap events. So you can just like exchange your clothing with some people within your area and then keep everything in circulation. So it's really good as well. In the UK, we have charity shops, of course. We all know them. This is from a charity shop. So I love charity shops. You can find great things there. And again, it's just a good way to keep things in circulation and give them a second life. Then there's a Bestiaire Collective, where it's again some kind of eBay, but then just for fashion. You can find anything in there. You can buy, sell pre-loved garments. So it's really good for to keep again these garments in circulation. If you have any questions about these, again, you can access all the links if you're interested in one particular one. And then one of the big parts of this workshop, and please here if someone wants to jump in, I think will be really good. I mean, this is the space where we ask all of these questions, especially about, so me as a brand, how you communicate what you sell is not always easy. Like, I try to do my best, but it is something very tricky because things keep changing. What I've noticed in recent years is like there is too much information out there, like so much that you don't even know what to believe anymore. So again, for me, this is the aim, the main aim of the workshop is just give you information and tools so you can ask the right questions. And then just you should be questioning a little bit more. Like at the end of the day, you're the one who's spending the money on an item, so you need to question this. And what I would tell you, like, I'm not calling everyone out or anything, but this is what you need to look out for generally. It's just the language, context, and tone. So the rule of thumb is like if you go to a website and you select a product and you go onto the information, if the information is not there, there's a reason why it's not there. I mean, if you have a very sustainable product and you're very proud of it, you would want to shout about it. You want to say, this is organic, or this is made here in my studio, this is handmade, If you are very proud of something, you generally want to brag about it. So if there's not that much information on that product description, it's probably a red flag. I mean, there's a reason why there's not there, basically. So that's the rule of thumb. Also, be aware of the language. Many times people just throw concepts out there, but without really knowing what it means. So when we see something labeled as sustainable, now you know better. So you're like, well, but what do you really mean by that? If we cannot say sustainable 100%, and because sustainability means something different to everyone depending on where they live in the world, so question that, then that's obviously not enough. Then you need to know a little bit more. So alternative words that are better, maybe it's conscious, or just be transparent about things are made. Like they can be made in China, in Bangladesh, but just be transparent. If you see that they show you where they're made, they're not trying to hide, how things are made, then that's probably a little bit more honest. That's someone who's just labeling as sustainable, So that's a little bit to watch out with the context and also the tone. Like if someone also is not giving you the sources of where they're basing their things from, that's also probably a red flag. Like there's nothing to hide in a way. So that's something to keep in mind. Then again, another point, I think I get this question a lot about the vegan label. So sometimes you'll see on product descriptions, vegan silk, you know, but of course now you know that silk is made with the moths and the cocoons. So obviously it's not vegan. I mean, it's still an animal product. So is wool. So when they speak about vegan silk, what does it really mean? Does it mean it's like a cellulosic based textile like tencel, bamboo, viscose? So what does that really mean? So that's something to definitely keep in mind. I mean, here the vegan label is where like they're trying to pretend, you know, some materials are posing for other materials like vegan silk or vegan leather. So I do have a problem with those labels specifically because some companies would use vegan leather, but it just means they're using plastic leather. So it's still PU. So then call it as PU leather instead of vegan leather. So that's the language that is a little bit vague. And even when it's alternative leather that is natural, like Piñatex or with mushrooms, like it's still, it's not strong enough. So they have to bond it onto a layer of woven, either cotton or generally polyester or PU, and then on top is the natural material. So it's still not 100% natural leather. So that's why vegan leather I have a bit of a problem with. Like it's not it's not specific enough. So then again, those are the things to watch out for. Again, it's just a wordplay to make you believe that something is so, but it doesn't make it real. So that's something to watch out for. In the terms of transparency, there's a really interesting study about the transparency index from Fashion Revolution, which is great. So it's basically a very thorough report of companies that are disclosing information. And obviously you can go to it in more detail, but basically it's a report that shows that most of the companies are really happy to provide the details of manufacturing at the stage of how a garment is assembled. So in a factory where it's cut and sewn and shipped, but not many people can actually account for or disclose the information of where the crops are being grown. So about the farmers, about the actual raw materials, so how the material is grown from the ground and where is then taken and spun and then woven or knitted. That's the part where many companies cannot really tell you much about, or they're not willing to disclose. So that's, again, it goes to more of an agricultural problem, and also how detached maybe we are of that supply chain. So me working in the industry, it's about that. It's like if you don't know where things are coming from as well, like there is that problem of like the supply chain is too difficult, or maybe the materials that you're using don't have the right certification. So it is something to watch out for. And also as consumers, I feel like if you're purchasing something and you are paying for it, you have the right to know where it came from. So that's something to look out for. So if you are curious to know maybe what Levi's or what companies do exactly, this is a great report because it just tells you what they are saying and what they're willing to disclose with facts and everything. So it's great. Another point that I have a problem with particularly is the carbon neutral story. So whenever people just say, oh, our company is fully carbon neutral, like what does that really mean? So sometimes it can be a very cheeky way of saying, oh, we're not shipping that much, or like we're still shipping things around the world, but we're planting a few trees in our backyard kind of thing. So again, like that's just numbers, but it doesn't really mean anything. Like if you're not fully changing your system and how you work around like your supply chain, you are not making anything neutral, you know? So it's not about that carbon offset that sometimes people talk about. So again, it can sound really beautiful and carbon neutral, wow, really cool, but nothing is fully carbon neutral. Like as long as things are being shipped and made and there's labor involved, it cannot be carbon neutral. So it's something we need to really watch out for. Like again, it always goes back to the supply chain and how that is managed, and no one is fully sustainable, no one is fully carbon neutral. So it's something to watch out for again. So my last tip, and I think for everyone, is just to keep in mind the holistic view. I think that's again, just look at the companies as a whole. So it's not just a garment that they're making, like it's also where the very origin of that design, the very origin of that, where did that come from and where is it going to end up? So if we look at it with a holistic view, we can understand that it's made, but in a very, complex and a very step heavy system. And if every single piece and step in that supply chain is not transparent, is not honest, and is not there for you as a consumer to see and to read about it, or that you can ask questions, then probably something's not clean. And it's okay. I mean, sometimes we tend to be really harsh, like things cannot change overnight and all of a sudden we are sustainable. Like it is about changing the system and how you operate, but unfortunately at the moment there's only so much you can do, and especially depends on where you're based. So for instance, going back to the problem of the hemp reputation in Brazil. So you might want to use hemp because you think it's like a great fiber, but then if it's not available in your surroundings, then what are you left to use, So it's an interesting dynamic. So it's never as simple. This is the last one, and I think it's very exciting too. I mean, it is all about power. I do still, believe like heavily that knowledge is power. I think if we were to approach fashion as we approach food and how we buy the products that we basically put in our bodies, we will be making like really wise decisions, and the decisions can be very easy. Again, if there's not enough information and something doesn't seem quite right, a lot of it is about the price, Sometimes if it's too cheap, you wonder, why is it so cheap, It's like if you start following the money too, you think, well, if it was made in Bangladesh or in Brazil or in Uruguay, in Chile, then you start Googling what's the minimum wage there, and then you realize, how does that make sense? Like, where is the profit going to, So obviously now we have so much access to information. Again, it's very confusing, but there's also not an excuse not to be aware of things. I mean, you can just Google it quickly, have a look, see what people are talking about, and then get, at least an idea, and then you can make an informed decision. Again, this is not to lecture you or like to tell you what to buy, what not to buy. Of course, it's Black Friday is coming, and all that comes with, especially in the West, is like a big thing. So it's more about you have now a knowledge, you're more aware of things. And it's also your money too. I mean, you're a very vital part of that supply chain. What most companies, as myself, it is at the end of the day, whoever like is buying your products, it's keeping your business alive too. So we don't give that power like enough, and that like value of the consumer. We don't appreciate it enough. So that's also the aim of this, to actually sort of shift the power a little bit to the people that keep your business alive, and hopefully then we can achieve something a little bit more wholesome. So that's about the power to the consumer. Like it's really something very special. Like I think we don't stress it enough. And also, again, it's your money, it's your time. So you are choosing what you want to support, whether it's the massive corporation or whether it's your local tailor, maybe it's not buying something, but it's a service, but you decide to put it back into your local economy. And as going back to what sustainability is for me, like depending on your context, it is like supporting a system that, where everybody grows, not just a very few. So it's like everyone lifts themselves up and can support, that part of what they do and that expertise, and also keeps it alive for generations, and keeps all of that alive. So yeah, ask more questions. That's also like what I always tell everyone. Please ask questions. It's very important. This is the last one, and it's again just more information. Like these are all the must. Like all of these companies are investing a lot of money in making a lot of research, and a lot of information available out there for free. So if you want to know more, please go to these links and get informed. If you haven't watched The True Cost, that's great movie. That was 10 years ago after Rana Plaza. So very relevant still today, especially if younger people come and haven't seen it. Like, it's really good. And all of this you can find. A lot of the facts that I talked about come from these websites as well. You can also email me any questions. So yeah, let's have a look back. If anyone has more questions, let's have a look. Of course, not everyone can afford the global organic trade certificate clothing and other environmentally and ethically sourced clothing, unfortunately. Do you recommend other than upcycling materials that are most cost effective to design with? Okay, so I'm guessing, Marianne, you're a designer or you're a small business? Is that correct? So basically, if you're a maker, and I get this, I mean, if you want to buy just organic fabric to make your clothing with, yeah, sometimes it's more expensive. Organic cotton is still very expensive, unless you are maybe based in India, and then you can access it like a little bit easier. I mean, upcycling is a way. Upcycling is also really difficult. I would say it's also not the. I don't know if it's easier. Like, I do know a lot of designers that have upcycling businesses, but it's very difficult to get clothes. Okay. Oh, okay, so you are an upcycler. Upcycle clothes from burlap, coffee bags, and a fine dino clothes, mental clothes. Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, so you know what I mean. So basically, the challenge with upcycling is that you need to first source your materials. So in this case, you're sourcing it from burlap coffee bags, which is amazing. Burlap is a great material too. It's also really strong and it dyes really easily. I mean, every natural material is really easy to dye. Like, it gets color like really easily, which is amazing. Um, that's great. I mean, experimentation is a great part of the process. I cannot stress that enough. I mean, whether you're a consumer or a designer or whatever it is that you do, it's good to experiment. A lot of the times, this waste material is all around us. So, what to do with it? I mean, it's great if you can upcycle it into accessories. You can do little bags. You can, if you have jars in your kitchen, you can do little bags for them out of burlap. I mean, endless situations. But I would say yes, if you're a hobbyist, upcycling is probably your best bet. I say this because upcycling gets a little bit tricky if you want to sell things if you want to scale it. So upcycling is challenging if you are thinking of scaling. So let's say you want to actually sell maybe 10 items. Then if you're upcycling something, you can't really guarantee that they all look the same. So sometimes that can be a problem. But if you're a hobbyist and you just want to do it for fun, is the best thing you can do. I mean, being sustainable sometimes is about using what's available to you and then try to make something out of nothing. I mean, that is basically the principle. And nowadays we see it as a hobby or whatever it is, but I mean, our grandparents did that out of necessity. So it is really beautiful. Sometimes you can go back and ask them or ask your parents and say, oh, how did grandma did this? And then you learn from that too. You sometimes realize that there's beautiful techniques that you didn't know that were already in your family and that you can learn, without even mentioning all the information and tutorials that are out there to upcycle. If you're based in London, there are great workshops as well on how you can upcycle. Again, about your question that accessing organic materials, it is becoming easier. There is a website, the Common Objective, that has a lot of suppliers with organic materials. So that's a great way to access those fibers. If you're really looking for specific organic places, it's becoming more popular. Even sometimes fabric shops that are small and local would supply organic materials too. Just make sure they have the certification so that they just don't tell you they're organic, but you can actually see the certification and they can obviously back it up, just to make sure that you know what you're buying, especially with the suppliers. Anyone else, if they have any other questions or concerns they'd like to talk about, or Okay, perfect. That's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, especially if you're a design student, I mean, I remember when, yeah, I mean, at the time I was studying, like it was still very rare. Like sustainability was so new. Like we didn't really know what was, happening. Whereas now, I mean, it's all about upcycling, isn't it? Um, so it's really great. I mean, again, the same as Marianne, just like experiment a lot. I mean, that time as a design student, experimentation is everything. Unfortunately, when you then start working somewhere else, whether you have your own business or you work for someone else, you have a lot of limitations. If you work for a company, you most likely won't be the one sourcing the raw materials. Most of the times, if you are working in a design studio, you just mainly design, the clothing, but then there's a team of developers who are choosing the materials. Like you somehow are presented with options, but you can't really, have full freedom to get something. So yeah, it is a tricky one. So I would say as a student, just experiment, try to see what's possible. Because obviously you're just making one of pieces when you do your project and your collections, you're making one off. So it's absolutely fine. I'm not sure in which country you study, but at the moment here in the UK, what a lot of students do is like they get clothing from charity shops, secondhand shops, vintage shops, or sometimes they just ask around their friends and their community, their neighbors for old clothing, and they'll use that to create more items. There's great upcyclers up there. I mean, yeah, precisely. That's really beautiful. So just don't underestimate the community around you. A lot of the times, even within your friends, they might have really old clothes that you can just get for free and make beautiful things out of it. You can, intervene them in natural ways, like natural dyes or embroidery. There's many ways that you can, again, it's all about upcycling. So try to improve what already exists. So that's always the challenge as a designer, is how you get something old and then try to make it into something very new. So that is always the challenge when you're upcycling. Um, Thinking about the industry and consumers, what really scares me is the general public does not know the price and value of clothes. With these new Chinese shopping sites, I feel that people buy clothes cheaply with the labor cost of others. And I also see a lot of overpricing of clothes in stores. It is difficult to know a balance between values in the industry. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, you're completely right. Especially in South America. I mean, I'm from Colombia and Chile. We import a lot. There is not a lot of local manufacturing. I know it's changing in the past, at least 5 years, it has changed. But most of the times, people are still really happy to go to Zara, H&M, and it's both things. So I'm really, I have sympathy as well, because obviously most sometimes maybe you can't afford to buy something more expensive that can be more sustainable. Doesn't necessarily mean it's more expensive, it's more sustainable. But it is really difficult sometimes. If you don't earn as much money but you need to wear something, you probably would go for the cheap option. I always recommend that it's good to keep in mind whether you really need something, and you can buy something cheap. There's no harm in that, especially if you cannot afford something else. But then wear it a lot, like look after it, try to, if it's broken, try to mend it, fix it. So there is ways around it. And again, share the knowledge that you have. You start with your own environment. So, even with your classmates at school, you can, exchange what you know, especially in fashion schools. I'm not sure how it is in Brazil, but sometimes it can be quite competitive and people get a bit funny about it, but you actually realize that it's really good. It's good to exchange things. Like sometimes you don't know what other person might come across, might be useful to you, and likewise. So in a way, exchanging that knowledge can also create better results. Like you can push each other. So especially with upcycling, like not everyone can upcycle everything. Most of the times in thrift shops, you might find things that you're not going to use, but then someone else can. So it's all about, trying to share that knowledge and try to create awareness where you can. So start with your family. If someone buys a lot, maybe just tell them, but do you really need it? Maybe you want to say buy less things, but then buy something better. Maybe you buy just one thing a year, and that's the challenge. But then you buy something of really good quality, great value that can last longer. So there is works around it. Again, if you are in doubt, if you're familiar with Fashion Revolution, which I will share the slides after, they have great resources that are very easy, very easy to read in many languages. So get involved with them. I mean, they do amazing projects. It's a great way to spread the knowledge, but also get knowledge, get to know other people. I think that's where it starts. I mean, we just need to share more of the knowledge in our industry. But I completely agree. It's we don't necessarily know where the value is. So that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this, because we need to spread that awareness at every level. So if you're studying, it's the beginning of your journey, and it's very important to get the basis right, because then you're going to go into professional life, whether it's your own business or working for someone else, and then you realize how many limitations there is. So the time as a student is for you to go crazy and experiment and see what the possibilities are. Well, I have a lot of documentaries. I have to say, if you haven't watched The True Cost, please do go and watch it. The True Cost is great. It's 10 years old, but if you're studying and if you're younger, then I don't know if nowadays it's still really popular to watch The True Cost. I'll put it here, it's also on the slides. Yeah, it's very, very good. There's also a YouTube channel, DW, that has great mini documentaries. Are quite short, but really good on what's happening now, like all the updates on recycling, for instance. All of that is very, very interesting. I think, at least, because that's a little bit the problem. There's a lot of technologies happening, but we just need to know more about them and also analyze over time how things have changed. I mean, the Bangladesh of 10 years ago is very different to the Bangladesh today, especially when you speak to the people there. So that's really good. I can share more of you now from the top of my head. I only think of those two. But that's also good. There's also things coming up. I'm just trying to think. I don't want to give you documentaries that are not really good, There's a lot about it out there, but I can tell you, yeah, The True Cost is very much still, very important and relevant. The rest, yeah, it's questionable. I try to question a lot of things. But yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for joining, and best of luck with your studies. It's a difficult time to be a student, but also it's an exciting time to innovate and to experiment. So, as it doesn't matter how grim the environment is, and there's always time, to experiment and see what happens. Like, I think as a closing statement, and what we shouldn't forget is that we're all part of this supply chain in a way, and it's all going back to collaboration and to share, and now more than ever it's easier to communicate. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, so it's really important to see what's happening around. So geographically, see what's happening around you. If you're in Brazil, see, okay, what's happening in Brazil, what's happening with the agriculture, what's happening with your community. Sometimes you don't have to go as far as, where you live, like your neighbors. See what's happening, see what they feel about it, and maybe with that you can get an idea to try to do an assembly with your neighbors, and maybe do a clothing swap or connection. So it's just to try to be more connected, and knowledge is power, like always. If you know about something new, try to share it. Just that would be my advice for you. And also keep experimenting. You never know. So thank you so much. And yeah, have a great rest of the day if you're in Brazil and other parts of the world. Again, if you have any other questions, you can always email me. And yeah, stay in touch if you want to know more. This hopefully will be the first of many videos to come. So please check out our YouTube channel too. I'll be putting out more content, especially going around sustainability and how it is to run a small business. So hopefully you'll find it insightful. So stay tuned and yeah, follow us to keep in touch. So thank you so much, and lots of love and best of luck to all of you. Thank you for joining.